So it is week 4 on the Violence Interrupted series. Today's theme is prison and punishment. We have already covered violence, trauma, and knife and gun crime. For those who are interested, you can watch it on the YouTube link that I will post afterwards. If you want more information on the Violence Interrupter Blab, then please follow me on Twitter at Whitney _Iles, ILES, and I'm happy to answer any kind of questions that you have. So I'm just gonna let Leon into the conversation. So like I said, hello, we're here.
Hey.
Here we go. So this week, give me 2 minutes to finish the intro and then I will introduce you both. So this week, I wanted to do a session on prison and punishment, because I think it plays into the equation of violence and why we have violence in our society, and we need to start looking at solutions, whether solution is the prison system, whether there's an alternative solution, or if there's something that we can be doing at the moment to improve the quality of rehabilitation with our young people. I say young people, so all our violence seminars are around youth and looking at the 11 to 25 population. I have a background in working with children and young people, especially within the serious youth violence sector, and within the last 4 years working in the prison system through my own organisation called Project 507. But that's enough about me. Just a few ground rules for today for those who are joining us. It's about keeping an open mind. It's not about blaming people, and it's about having a conversation to spread knowledge to those who wouldn't necessarily get access to the type of expertise that we would have access to, or the experience that we have had, and being able to help other practitioners and other people within the community learn and grow themselves, and also being solution focused. So always looking at what we need to do to create change and create more positive peace. So that being said, I am going to give the spotlight over to Leon. Leon, could you just spend a couple of minutes introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what is your history, and then we will move on to Aladin.
Okay, I'll be brief. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So my name's Leon. I currently work in the prison system. I do resettlement and rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. My background is high risk mentoring, negotiating, and I've worked with ex-offenders for about 10 years now. I used to rehabilitate people through sports, ups and downs, obviously, because I believe that no matter how good you are at sport, you need an academic background. At some point in your life, you will need that, basically. So I work in a prison at the moment, which is ironic for the topic, obviously, as we're talking about prison and punishment every single day, and what it does and what it means. I'm writing a book at the moment around this kind of thing. So I haven't got a lot of time at the moment to do it, but I'm just doing it in between. So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, brilliant. And Aladin?
Yes, I mean, I've done about 30 years of youth and community work in and around young people at risk of violence, young people at risk of coming to the attention of the justice system, both on housing estates and a lot of street detached work around that. But also I've worked with young adults up to the 25 age group and beyond, who are also at the risk of violence and of coming to the attention of the justice system, who are homeless. And separately, I have a background, I'm a professor, so I teach innovation and strategy at a number of universities in the UK. It's at Loughborough, Cranfield, Royal College of Art, and I strategic counsel, including to Project 507, of course, to companies which range from the energy sector to retail brands, but also projects in government. So I've done strategic counsel for Mayor Ken Livingstone on his key civil society projects, as well as the Prime Minister on a project of his. And Whitney knows that I've also got a separate background as an interdisciplinary artist. But it's kind of the innovation angle and social development, these two coming together in this one. But I do operate in sort of parallel threads.
Brilliant. Right, I'm just going to do some housekeeping. Aladin, your signal has gone ever so slightly, so we only have you on audio, and it's a bit in and out.
Okay.
So you might need to tweak that a little bit. Leon, I need you to come a little bit closer to the camera.
You know, you cannot come too far away, right?
Yeah, there you go. And then kind of be up a little bit more. We've got you from about there. Sit on the book.
On a book. Okay, 1 second.
On my side, what I can do is I could take the. I'm not sure. I've not used Blab before. This is the first time. I could probably remove the video and I guess stay in the audio. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We just can't see you at the moment.
I can see him okay though.
Oh, you can see him.
Okay, yeah. I think it's just you who can't see me.
Okay, that might just be me. All right, we're just going to go with it. It's live. Hey. Okay, so we've picked up on in previous Blabs, you know, a few really key points. So first of all, what we did was we looked at violence and starting to understand violence, and you know, some of the things that were picked up. I think Gwenton picked up previously that violence is an addiction. We've also I think Raymond spoke about violence being very much spreads like an epidemic, so we need to get in the way of violence. So we did a Blab on understanding violence and what we can do to work with violence. Then we went a little bit deeper in week 2 and started looking at trauma and the effects violence has on a community and on an individual, but also why violence is there in the first place. And we spoke about knife and gun crime and how actually a lot of the emotions that are fueling that can be the guilt of being a perpetrator, and you know, the violence getting more and more severe due to, you know, a young person trying to avoid the guilt that they feel, because as soon as you stop, you have to, you know, be face to face with what you have done. And you know, we've spoken around a range of different subjects, and I think last week we also mentioned shame and violence and how there is a shift in power. And if you know, dad is having a really hard day at the office and he's had his boss yelling at him all day, then he might come home and he might yell at the wife. The wife might then yell at the kids, and the kids might then kick the cat, and then the cat might eat the mouse. Kind of, you know, it spreads because we're always trying to put this horrible feeling onto the next person. So we spoke about that briefly last week, and it's something that I think we need to speak a little bit more on this week, because a lot around punishment is about shaming an individual. It's about, you know, the naming and the shaming. And one of my favorite authors on this particular subject, again, is James Gilligan. I think he's done some really amazing work. And I'm just going to start things off with a quote from him. Oh, Aladin, you're back now. So I'm going to start things off with a quote from his book, Violence Are Reflections on Our Deadliest Epidemic, which I love. It says, punishment is a form of violence in its own right, a legally sanctioned form, but it is also a cause of violence, as it stimulates the very same illegal violence that is intended to inhibit or prevent. So, you know, this was the first time when I was reading James Gilligan, it was the first time that I really actually understood punishment as something that can also cause a lot of violence. And in the last, you know, 4 years of my career working within the prison system, we've been looking at alternative ways and of understanding violence in prison, but also solutions to what we can do to reduce violence. So I'm going to that's my little piece to say. So I want to hand it over to Leon again. And just, you know, say something about your thought processes about prison and punishment, and if it's working, or if you feel like something else needs to be done, or any, you know, key patterns that you're finding with the work that you're doing within the prison system.
Okay, well, my stance on this is that prison at the moment, well, sometimes does more for our young people than what schools and colleges do. Mm-hmm. Now, I often say this a lot, and people are like, oh, why? And I'll tell you why, right? It's because prison takes away every single element except time. Mm-hmm. That's what it does. And school life and college and everything else is so busy that you have to have a hectic schedule, you have to have a social life, you have to see your friends, mm-hmm. all this kind of stuff. But what it does is leave you with is time. So what prison does, and this is why a lot of guys go to prison skinny and then come out hench, because they have that regime of eating 3 times a day, of getting the right amount of sleep, proteins, and all those things. What prison also does is that it gives someone time to be able to read, write, reflect, and study. Now, when you ask people in prison, obviously I work there every single day, so when you ask them, they're like, oh, when I was out, I should have spent more time reading, I should have spent more time writing, I should have went to school, I should have listened. So in that sense, it works well. But as I keep saying, prison doesn't hinder a lot of young people. It's what they do while they're in prison. That's what hinders them. They've got GCSEs they can do, they've got A-levels they can do, they've got degrees that they can do, but sometimes they just choose not to do them. And it's that thing again, well, if you know something can benefit you, you'll do it. So what are a lot of the CRC workers and resettlement workers, their job is to basically ensure that these people understand while you're in here, get an education and better yourself. If you're going to go to prison and do nothing at all, you're going to come out leaving exactly the same way. You get me?
It's almost like I read once that prison is a great way to save face when you need help. So a lot of the young people won't ask for help, and they would feel too ashamed to ask for help and ask for access into their GCSEs or into employment or education or all those kind of things, or even to have someone care for them. And actually going to prison is a nice way to save face, to be in a predicament where someone's looking after you 24 hours a day. And then, you know, it takes it to the real extreme for those who are extra violent in prison. You can argue the fact that it is to save face, because if you're even more violent in prison, that means you're going to get monitored the most. It means you're going to have your OMU and your support workers seeing you every day. So it is a great way to save face when you need help. And it's not necessarily a conscious process. It's a very subconscious, unconscious process and way of needing help and asking for it.
Okay, so listen, right? It is exactly the same. It works the same as when you're in school, if you can't read or write, and then the teacher's going to turn around and say, oh, John or Terry or whatever, can you read from page whatever to chapter whatever? It's easier to act a class clown, get thrown out of the class to save embarrassment. You get thrown out of the class, you're a hero to your friends, and then you're not embarrassed. It's the same. Cassidy, a rapper, once said he would rather go to jail than be a bum. Now what happens is that the need for wants is in all of us. So you get to a point in life, if you don't do well at school, you don't do well at college, you're always on the street corner, you do all them things, you get to a point where naturally we all want. So say you get to 16, 17, you want the PS or you want the trainers or you want something else. So what happens is that you'll go about it a different way, stealing or robbing or joining that word gang again, and then you'll go about it that way. So it's about installing this is the right way. So from the start, educating again. And that's why when they go to prison, they almost get re-educated. Well, you're right, it's easier to act a fool and go to prison and save face and say, well, the reason why I haven't got a job is because I'm in prison. It's easier.
And Aladin, have you got anything to add to this point of the conversation?
I'd like to let Leon go on there, because I'm very interested in hearing from him his experience of the time being incarcerated being good for the person in terms of the learning they get. I want to hear from him whether he feels that the regime currently, in terms of what young people who are in prison, what they go through, whether it's adequate for the kind of productivity that Leon reckons they could get in prison. So what's your view on that, Leon? And
sorry, can you just clarify the age group that you work with?
Okay, so this is what I was going to say to you now. There are two types of jail for a man, obviously. Well, there's many types, but there are two main types. There's young institutions, and there's the man's jail, right? Young institutions there's a lot of violence in there. There's a lot of it's like a playground, fighting all the time. So when that person then gets to like 19, 20, 21, and they go to a man's prison, they always say, oh, it's calmer here. I want to get my head down and do my time. It works well if you have a good caseworker in there that will go and see these people and say, what do you want to do with your life? What have you been doing with your life? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? That's when it works well. If you just go to prison and you just mix with other offenders, or the iron sharpens iron, either way, whether it's good or bad, So if you just go to prison and you just around people that just commit crime all the time and then plan the next moves when they get out, it's not good for you. But if you catch them at 21, 22, when they just go in there and you have a conversation and you try and map out the future, it can work well then. It can do.
So, Leon, do you think that if you are working with somebody there and they agree to be educated, do you think the resources are there to meet that? And secondly, what's the impact of it?
Yeah, because in prisons, you have National Career Service. Right. Now, this is my gripe at the moment.
Go on.
Prison offers a lot of courses. Your level 1s, your level 2s, all that kind of stuff. To me, I wouldn't particularly go down that route because you could do 2 years of your level 2s and 3s. It's not recognized on the outside when you get out of prison. Things like A-levels and degrees, they're recognized. So if you go to prison, you can see the National Career Service and they can enroll you on a course like that. But it's the fact that a lot of prisoners don't know about this. They just don't understand it and they don't know. In the last month, I think I've got 5 prisoners looking at this now. One's going to start, one's writing a book, one's just come out of his cell. He's been on remand for 3 months and he wouldn't come out. I gave him a book, The Secret, about positive thinking, and he'll come out. So when people turn around and go, oh, prison's easy because we get TVs and radios. No, prison's not easy because losing your freedom is never easy. It's never. If you're coming from a foreign country where it's really bad over there, I can see why you may think it's easy. But over here, when you lose your freedom, nothing's easy about that. You get locked up from 6:30 until 8:30 in the morning. And if you don't go to work, you'll get locked up throughout the day. And then if you have enemies in there or you're getting bullied in there, it's just not easy. People commit suicide in there, self-harm and everything because it is difficult in there.
Yeah. And just to go back on the education, I am aware that we do have access to open universities in prison. Yeah. The issue of that being is you need to be very well behaved to be able to do your open university course. And sometimes the more violent ones, the people who are more violent within the prison system need more of the reward, more of the kind of dopamine stimulus to stop misbehaving. And actually, the more we punish them, the more violent they're becoming, because it goes back to that shame thing. If you're violent and you're misbehaving, or even if you're not going to your door on time, then you get punished. When actually, sometimes with these young people that are more violent, what they need is less punishment and more rewards, because the punishment isn't a language that they understand anymore. It's the language that they've always had.
Okay, but then the reward and punishment thing has to go hand in hand, whether it's in prison or society. So if you're late for work, you can't expect to get paid or keep your job. And if you can't make it back to your selling time, or you can't get to lessons in time, then you can't expect to be rewarded at the same time. Like I'm not saying don't get me wrong, I'm not all for prisoners should get this and prisoners should get that. I'm saying while they're in prison, the rehabilitation process needs to work for them. Yeah. So we've all worked with angry people or violent people, and there has to be sometimes multiple conversations why you're so angry, or get to the root cause of why you're angry, and then let's see if we can turn the corner, let's see if we can fix it and go the other way. That takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of skill, and I don't think it takes skill that qualifications brings. It takes skill that life skills bring. That's what it takes.
It's interesting because in my lecture I had this morning, we were speaking about the same kind of issues, but from a neurobiology point of view. So looking at it from, getting a dopamine fix, and that we all want our dopamine fixes in life. We all have our habits, our coffees, our smoking that gives us our dopamine fix. And actually, when we're speaking about adolescents in prison, so we're speaking about the 11 to 25 year old population, what a lot of them are missing out on is that positivity, that dopamine fix, and getting into the habit of negativity. For the people that are asking on the questions, the topic is prison and punishment. So we were looking at it from a purely neurological, biological space, and also looking at teenagers in prison, and actually they're going through huge hormonal changes. So as much as it's conversations, we can have conversations, a lot of it is physical as well, and the fact that their body is reacting physically and that they need physical time out of cell in order to process those chemicals properly. And when we're speaking about 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds in prison, when they're violent, they get locked up for 23 hours a day. which actually creates more violence.
Yeah.
Because you're sitting in the, you know, a tuna can with all these different emotions and hormones that you have no control over, you know, running through your body. Then you've got the trauma aspect of it. So you've got all the thoughts that you would normally be trying to push down and not listen to, all happening at one time. And then a young person comes out of his cell and goes whacking the first officer or person they see. And everyone goes, oh, why? He goes, well, actually, you know, there's patterns and reasons for this. So I think I agree with you. I think there is a lot of talking that needs to happen, but there's also a lot of the kind of physical aspects that need to be thought of when we do prison work.
Yeah, I agree. Especially when you're looking at young offenders, I think that I don't think there's enough understanding around what they're going through and what they go through. It's hard enough for, and again, I'm not saying, I'm not all for them in terms of reward them, but it's hard enough when you're 16 trying to do your GCSEs, then you have to decide what career you want to do and all that kind of stuff, and being locked in a prison cell so young and not understanding, because really they are children at that age. They are still children, so they have to come face to face with themselves. They don't understand, and it's easier to be violent and act against the system than it is with the system. Yeah.
And because, you know, a lot of teenagers go through that rebellious stage anyway. So the ones that have hit the prison system are already there. And then you have the prison officers that are acting as mummy and daddy, or the prison that's being mum and dad. And then they have to rebel against, you know, the new object, the new authority figure. So I think, you know, prison and children, I'm not the biggest fan of, because I do think it's such a crucial age. And we also look at the brain development side of things. You know, as an adolescent, your brain only stops really developing when you're around 25, 26. So what we've done is we're putting a lot of children in situations where they're not being completely stimulated 24 hours of the day. So they're seeing the same things day in, day out, day in, day out. And, you know, that has a particular particular way of shaping the mind and shaping the brain. And I think that also plays into the trauma of leaving prison. You know, and plays into why so many children and young people reoffend, because they go out into the world with a mind that's been understimulated, and then all of a sudden gets everything thrown back at it, and no one's really doing that kind of work to say, actually, it's fine. It's just you're seeing colours again, and you're smelling flowers, and, you know, hearing cars.
Like I see again, it's. I know everybody is responsible for their own actions, but I feel that society has to accept that it has major influences as well. And when young people are seeing that now, you know, it's more cool to be rebellious than it is to be a law-abiding citizen. That's just how society is nowadays. So when a young person is mixed up in the criminal system and they do go to prison, they can either not. I'm not saying it has to be one of two ways, but they'll either think, I don't want to come here again, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep out of it, or they're going to turn around and say, this actually isn't that bad, and I could come here again. And that's the dangerous part of it.
Aladin, are you there?
No, I'm very much here, Okay. I think Leon and I, we can see each other. You can see me?
No.
I can see you,
Okay. Yeah, well, he can, yes.
That's right.
I can see you,
So, Aladin, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
Just to say, I'm fascinated because Leon does not sound pessimistic about innately the regime in prison, because I think, as he said at the outset, what you get in prison, which you don't have in the outside world, is time. And from what Leon is saying, it's in a way, the challenge is not as huge from the way he's putting it, in that if you get the individual to take an interest in their learning, then there is scope for that inclination towards learning to be met, to be stationed. So that's, I mean, that is very interesting, because.
All right. So listen, right. I'll give you an example, right? You're driving somewhere, you're really, really thirsty, and I want to drink. and you get out the car and you go into the shop and they've got 30 cans of whatever, and you're gonna be like, what shall I get? What shall I get? What shall I get? Right? And then you might spend, I don't know, 30 seconds choosing, boom, pay, back in the car. Let's say, same scenario, you're in the car, you're driving down the road, you're really thirsty, you go to the shop, all they have is one bottle of water. There is no choice. You're in and out, and that's it. So what prison does, effectively, takes away everything and leaves the importance of just you and yourself. It just gives you time to reflect. But on the outside, there are so many distractions out there that people just get caught up in it. So for you to grow up and to get GCSEs and get A levels and then go and get a degree and go and get a PhD and then move on, it takes so much discipline. It takes so much discipline for you to say, I'm going to stay in and do my homework. Everyone's going to parties, they're going to clubs, I'm going to stay in. And this is what we're lacking now. We're lacking the ability to give these people, our young people, our children, whoever, discipline. So when they go to prison, like their whole world's turned upside down and all they have is time. And then you're going to sit there and think, well, not always, but with the help of other people around, they might sit there and think, I don't want to come here again. What can I do to not come here again?
And I agree with you. I challenge it in a sense of, I think that there's multiple layers of consciousness and unconsciousness that's happening while a young person is in prison, and again, young person between the age of 15 and 25. And I think everyone deals with prison differently, and I think there's also a lot of unmet needs, and it's all well and good, opening up education to young people. And I think, yes, young people need education. But I think also a lot of those young people in prison are the young people that have been kicked out of school or kicked out of their PRUs. And that is down to underlying issues as well that have not had their needs met. So a lot of times we're working with young people that will identify as ADHD. Now, ADHD sometimes can be misdiagnosed because it's complex trauma. It's trauma that's happened as a child, that the needs have been unmet. And what happens a lot of the times in classrooms is you'll see the young people, the children, like moving all the time. And actually what that is symbolic behavior of what's going on in their mind, and their mind isn't still. So when we put them into prison and then put them into prison cells, what we do is we force them to be still and to really see and feel what's going on in their mind. And if a young person is not being looked after in the right way around that is where the harm comes in. And I think that's where we start looking at the suicide rates. That's where we start looking at self-harm. And that's where we also start looking at the violence, because we have people that internalize that and want to be violent on themselves and harm themselves because of all this undealt with trauma. And then we also look at those who then become violent towards others within the prison system. So these are the young people that education might, yes, be good for, but it's good for them later on down the line when the other work has been done. And my fear is there's not enough of the other work being done.
Yeah, okay. So I agree. You can't just keep saying to somebody, oh, education, because it doesn't work that way. For you to do anything in life, you have to have a reason. If there's not a reason, you won't do it. So when people go, oh, I want to go to the gym, and you're like, well, why do you want to go to the gym? Now, bear with me. Oh, I want to lose weight. That's not a reason. No, it is. No, it's not. Because when you look that way now. So when you're tired and you're fed up and you don't want to go anymore, that's not a reason. You have to have a real valid reason, and you have to stick with it. So which is why education in prison, when you spend time mentoring and going over, and you have to make people understand that education is the basis of all things. That's what I believe personally, from my own experience, from somebody that left school and didn't get an education, and then I thought, oh, I don't care. I just played basketball and thought, oh, I'm going to make it professional. It's all right. And then every barrier that you come against really is, well, what do you have on paper? So when we go back to violence and talk about violence, and this is what I'm not saying, when people turn around and go, well, we need ex-gang members to work with people that are in gangs, but I don't know. I don't agree with that. I just think that you need somebody that has understanding and empathy and can relate to a situation, not necessarily have been in there, but can take time to actually understand it. So you have to understand when these people are just violent all the time, it's so easy to be violent when you don't speak the same academic language, or you don't speak the same language with somebody else. It's just easy. It's, you know, when people, again, like I know that we've said this before, when people say, oh, he violated me or she violated me or whatever, and then the languages are violence, because you're going to understand a punch in the face. You're not understanding when I'm saying stop doing it to me, but a punch in the face, you'll understand. So when people are like, oh, I got angry, again, it's about going back to education, going back to time, going back to segregation, going back to being away from all those things and spending time with yourself, if you know what I mean.
All right. So spanner in the works.
Yep.
Life sentences. Children that are sitting on 18-year sentences where that planning to be released is not even a thought process. Does education work then?
Okay, so I'll give you an example, and it's good that you touched on that. I'm working with somebody right now, right? You may know this case of joint enterprise, which...
We're doing that next week, so perfect.
So he's 15, he's out with his friends, he decides to go home, so he walks off, like someone gets murdered, he's 15, he gets life. He's 21 years old now. And I think he might get parole. Well, there's a possibility of parole in 2019, right? So I'm spending a lot of time with him at the moment now. And I'm like, well, what are your plans for when you get out of here? And he's like, well, he wants to sing. He wants to be a singer. So right now I'm spending my time with him, again, about education, because he comes out of prison with a criminal record like that. It's going to be very difficult for him. Like it really, really is. So whether you get 15 years, 18 years, I think that those sentences are harsh. But in the same way, just because they've got massive sentences, I don't think we should be like, well, you're going to be here for so long now. Forget it. Education.
Because a lot of the work that I do, so I do, similar work, specialists around gang interventions, violence reduction with the real kind of high risk people within prisons.
Yeah.
And a lot of the feedback that I get from the prison system is it's the young lifers, so the ones in their early 20s that are not going to get parole until 2034, 2035, that are causing the most violence within the prison. And I think a lot of that goes down to the lack of hope. I mean, even Open University, I think they can only do within the last 6 years of a prison sentence.
That's right, yeah, 6 years, yeah.
So it's not even like you can go in and spend 20 years, getting a PhD or a master's. It's, you have to do your level 1, level 2, level 3, which will take you 3 years to do everything. And then you have a good 20 years on your sentence where there's not really that much that you can do. So to those, I'm challenging you because I want to get the learning out to other people that are working with this age group on these sentences and what can be done for them. Can we still use education?
Okay, so when I'm talking about education, a lot of people just put it down to things like, Shakespeare and a qualification. I am talking about knowledge, because knowledge is power. So I am talking about general reading, writing, research, soul searching. And let me just jump back a second, because I'm not in any way undermining somebody gets 20, 30 years and just say, oh, go and do that. It must be the biggest mind boggle ever. And I've spoke to people and I've said, how do you, I spoke to people that have been IPP since 2005, and that's a 99-year tariff.
Explain what IPP is for those who don't know.
It's basically indefinite imprisonment for public protection. So IPP is a 99-year tariff, but it's been scrapped now. They haven't got it anymore.
Basically, it means for those who are in prison, they could have been doing 4 months, but if the prison system, the criminal justice system, thinks that they're not, they're too high risk for the public. Yeah, if they're too high risk for the public, then they can be kept in prison until they're allowed out. So we've got young people in prison on IPPs that have come in for 1 year and done 7 already.
Yeah, I've got 2 guys now that came in for 2 years and they've done 12 now. But they've been to Cat D's, so they've been to a lesser prison and things. So I'm in no way saying that, oh, you get life and then just start reading and writing. I know, I can't imagine. It must be the worst thing in the world. And you're going to freak out, when people find out that they have a terminal illness, some people go off the rail because it's hard to comprehend. Like, it's for the mind to comprehend that either you're not going to be here or you're going to be here forever, like it is. But for those that might get 15, 20 years. So I'll give an example. Don King, if I'm not mistaken, when in prison, I think he killed a guy, the boxing guy. And when he went in, he literally swallowed a dictionary and a thesaurus. And his education, his vocab is just off the rail. Like, when you talk to him, it's like he's talking another language. So he educated himself, and then he came out. Now, I'm not saying that education is going to take away the fact you've got a life sentence, but it's not. But what it might do, it might empower you, help you to deal with your time in there, help you to deal with what's going on, and not only for that, but for your family and friends that come to visit you. If you get visitors, your children, your parents, whatever, so you can hold a different conversation, read about the paper, what's going on in the world, have an opinion, do writing, do journalism, anything like that.
See, I think you touched on a really major point there, self-awareness in regards of education. I think if we could start doing more self-awareness courses in the prison system, that would bring down a lot of the violence, because a lot of these young people, you know, have been through the trauma and violent lifestyles, and they've lost their empathy. So they're performing violence in a very kind of sadistic, psychopathic way, without being psychopaths. I wouldn't class any of the young people I work with as psychopaths, but there's psychopathic traits when you lose your empathy. But the more self-aware you become, the more your empathy develops. So the more you can see self, the more you can understand your own issues, and you can understand someone else's issues. So you're less likely to kick off at someone else.
You understand.
If you understand, because I think that's a lot of the work that, you know, my teams do within the prison system, and a lot of the work I do with a lot of young men and young women is about understanding self. And I think education in that space is amazing. My concern is education within the actual system at the moment is very much, I think we're seeing in the Youth Offender Institutes for the under 18s, it's 30 hours of education a week at the moment. And that is very much your maths, your English, you know, same as school. But I think what you're saying in regards of bringing in more self-awareness, more time to reflect.
Yeah, because you know, you can't the saying, you can't learn to run before you learn to walk, right? So if you're trying to throw education at somebody, go and do English, maths, and geography, whatever, for 30 hours, it's not going to work. They have to have some kind of epiphany within themselves. So how many times have we seen, and I'm sure you've seen it, when I've been in the prison and somebody, and you'll read about it in the paper, he's gone out, this young guy or this guy, and he's done loads of offences, and you've got this mean mugshot, and he's really dangerous, and he's high this and he's high that, and he comes into the prison, and he comes into the holding block, and he cries his eyes out, he cries, and he'll sit down, and he'll sit there, and you give him time. What's happened is the realization of what he's done and where he's going to be. And it's at that point where somebody breaks, they can rebuild, but somebody has to break. I don't mean just being break down on the floor and start crying. You have to have your own Damascus Road moment, your own epiphany to say, do you know what I've done is terrible, or I need to change my life. You have to help somebody come to that point. So I can't bring person one to English and maths every single day if he has not yet come to the point where he understands why he needs English and maths. That's more important. They need we all need understanding of why we're doing something, and this is what I think it would value inmates more if we give them more self-awareness, more thinking skills, and give them a chance to talk, almost like counselling in a way. That would work better than saying you're going to learn to read and write today. Yeah,
and I think what you said about, you know, a person has to have their own epiphany. They have to be ready within themselves, and it's as us as practitioners and facilitators to facilitate the space and make sure that the space as a prison is safe and can facilitate growth. Because I don't think it's on us as practitioners to break down a young person. And I've seen that before. I've seen practitioners come in and say, you know, I'm going to break down this young person. He needs to understand it from this level. And actually, I think it's not about that. I think it's about us as, you know, practitioners being able to create the space for when young people are ready, they can actually come into the space and facilitate their own change.
I don't think it's up to us either, because I think it's dangerous because you don't know what's in a person's mind, and if you unlock it and you're not qualified to deal with what you've unlocked, you will cause more harm than good, I believe. Aladin, what do you think?
It's fascinating because in a way, it's instructive to listen, and both of you have very current experience of working with people. I mean, what's interesting coming out of just the two of you speaking is a sense of the potential of education in prisons, because I think education in the UK is a word that's being used a lot more now. The regime around education in prisons, and that's a former Secretary of State of Education is now Justice Minister who's actually targeted that as a priority, it's really interesting because the narrative in the wider public is a different one.
Yeah,
the narrative in the wider public goes a little bit like this. It's a little bit as if you have a public health authority in charge of a whole area, and then an awful lot of people who commit suicide by jumping off a cliff. So then you hear that public authority has created an amazing strategy for dealing with that. What do? They have got a long line of ambulances at the base of the cliff.
Yeah.
And that's their strategy. So for some in the public, they feel actually either we are scratching the surface and we are not really addressing the root causes, or go to the other extreme, which is to say that some people would hear this conversation and just go, hey, it seems a soft option. Where is redress? Where is retribution? And the notion of punishment and the notion of shame has been built in through millennia for the whole business of incarcerating, imprisoning. So it's interesting, of course, to hear from yourselves who actually have to work with people. But what's interesting is that a lot of folks out there, without hearing what you have to say, will just say, there's a whole bunch of liberals there. We're all into talking about the terrible situation of these people. They're in prison, they're prisoners, and what they're going to do afterwards. And in a sense, society has an intolerance for hearing about that. I think what I wanted to say a little bit about neuroscience around this and something of nudge design, but also looking at the whole idea of behavior which is deviant from the norm. Well, a human being who deviates from the norm, by and large, has had an upbringing and a socialization which is separate to the norm. And so when in the prison, you have a chance maybe to help this person, and if you're going to cure, it's about reconnecting them with certain processes which were messed up early in life. And we know, by and large, all those of us who work in and on violence and in on violence in prisons, we understand that. So I'd say the people who work in the prison system, they know the impact this work has and the good that it does. Society has two things it wants out of this. They want punishment of the individual for the crime they've committed, and second, they want to make sure they're safe as a society from these people committing crimes again.
Yeah.
So I'm very aware, as we all are, of the enormous pressures on proving that if you have this regime, it's not a soft touch regime, that they get well educated, we're not treated. So just to say that, all this we have to understand, we need to look at the framing of that in terms of the rhetorical battle between politicians and between funders. So I just wanted to put that in, because in a way we have to inject that in. Otherwise, it just sounds that this is easy. The whole prison system, it works. It gives them time, give dedication, just dump stuff in there, let them be educated. But it's not quite as easy as that. But just hang on, because it's so interesting hearing the interplay between Leon and Whitney. I mean, the couple of things which occurred to me just listening to you. I mean, I have, the idea of prison regime as being something which will inhibit or create aversion to going to prison. Therefore, it inhibits people from committing crime in the first place. And then what'll happen to those people who might commit crimes? Oh, apparently they hear that they want to go to prison. Apparently, it's not so bad. They get out, fine. So you can see how this could be twisted, is the best way of putting it, as a narrative by the wider public. So just to say that we have a whole communications need here to be able to be in dialogue with all of society in a way where we don't need to interpret or be seen to be taking sides. There's no good or bad guy in this. But ironically, of course, we're dealing with a subject where they are meant to be good guys and they are meant to be bad guys. and bad girls and good girls and so on. A couple of things, which is in terms of addressing this, I think one thing is that we can try to add value to what's already there. And so Leon's work for me is really exemplifies adding value to what's already there. So he's working obviously with great impact on being able to motivate individuals to be able to access the resources there. And obviously he advocates for them within that system as well. So there's that business of making the system work. But there's also a real sense that isn't the system failing? Because apparently when you're in prison, it's not a curative. And the threat of prison is an inhibiting factor. So there's this funny cycle going on. Then there's the other side, which is that, okay, people are adding value to the existing regimes. Some of the things one can do is, there's stuff like learning from neuroscience is interesting, because I think Whitney and I have had a conversation about nudge design in prisons. And to be able to add value to the existing regime and to look at some things which you can change at not great cost in the units, in the physical spaces, which help us to adapt, change behavior, and encourage other ways of reacting to the same circumstances. So I think there's stuff that can happen. Obviously at 507, we're in discussion with a whole range of parties across sectors to try and make this happen through our own resources. But there's another thing here, which is I think we have to be looking at the business of innovation in general, which is about understand that society locks itself into a binary around justice, okay? Because when you mentioned joint enterprise, it triggers, as you know, in everybody who works in business, huge red bells, which is difficult to convey to the wider public, okay? Because the binary is that we are working with people in prisons who wider society has said are bad people. Yeah. That's why you're in prison. Yeah. You and I, we all know we don't actually engage with people like that. We can have an effect on their behavior and, inverted commas, cure people. Well, in no way do we need to get into this binary of them accepting that they are bad, or that this is, in some sense, they now have to redress that. And because there's also outside, when you look at victim impact and so on, there's something around, well, contrition, can this person show contrition? Is that an aspect of it, and so on? So it's a very complex political minefield. I just said I wanted to interject that because it's really affects funding worldwide, and what we know worldwide is prisons do not work in any sense, and yet these enormous amount of resources are thrown in. Whereas there's an enormous amount of learning about education. And I'm really happy when education crops up, because obviously I'm a professor as well, I'm interested in education. But the key is education. The key to solving this is education, not just of the person who's incarcerated, but of looking at the learning from that and applying that in wider society in the everyday context, such that the person doesn't become a person who chooses to deviate from that socially accepted norm. I think that's the other thing. So it would be very interesting to hear from Whitney and Leon about, so what sort of norms do they attach onto if they become cured and so on. But just a last thing I wanted to say, if we can agree that maybe there is no big genetic predisposition towards kind of social deviance other than obvious things, psychopathic disorder and so on. Mm-hmm. And we are talking about impacting on behavior. It's not going to happen instantly. It is costly, and this is something we need to say, because it takes resources, either because of the intensity of the work we need to do with individuals, or the length of time we have to work around that. There's no getting out of that. When a person has a physical injury, as we all know, it is so much easier to address, When a person has, in a sense, a psychological injury, as many of the prison population do, and especially those who are violent, that is something which cannot be cured overnight. either by threat of grievous sanctions or by the promise of extraordinary things. And the one thing to say here is, I'm an economist as well, is the productivity of society, how it goes on. We're talking about the amount of resources the prison system takes up. But, we're talking about a population who Leon, Whitney, Marcel know. These are folks, if we work with them, they would be hugely productive, of course for themselves, but for the benefit of wider society, because they would become individuals who are contributing in the fullest way to society, not just as economic creatures, but also as social creatures. And I think that's what's so strong about what Leon is saying, is I'm looking at just saying, hey, as an economist, that's brilliant. That person comes out, they're going to contribute to the economy, but also they're going to contribute to repairing the social fabric and so on. And I think we need to be pragmatic and define a range of arguments, because we are otherwise in fear of, and we know this, speaking to the converted, because we know what works. But we also know that this doesn't play out really well outside. And we need to understand how to interpret this learning, use a different language even, and understand how wider society can learn about where it's going wrong, not just around crime, but around many things which require cohesion in a society. And half the things we're seeing under the shadow of terror worldwide, under the sense of strain that the idea of migration puts on people, all these things are about a society which where the dialogues between each other are broken. We, Leon, you work with people to restore the person's inner dialogue with the wider society, and hopefully they will have a sense of a society which is empathic and caring and a fair society. But I think we need to be able to take these narratives and integrate them and marry them to the wider narratives out there. Otherwise, it's these bleeding heart liberals who are doing soft touch work, loving and hugging the prison population. And we know that's not true, because I myself have worked with, and I continue to work with, violent people. So, but we have to understand the pragmatic reality. We need the resources. Yeah. We need wider society to change its outlook on this. And we have a duty to interpret and translate what we're doing. So
I'm just going to interject there, Aladin, because we're running close to time. I have a question in the box saying, what change should be implemented in the prison system? So if you just want to sum up your thoughts, Leon, we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. So,
okay. All right. Okay, I'll be quick. What changes should be implemented in the prison system? I think that people should work with people's mentality rather than trying to force things upon them, which I'm all for education, as you heard me say. I think that we need to work with people's mentality more than trying to tick boxes. Every human being is an individual with individual needs. So I think that what we should do is cater to their needs more, not to pamper them again, but for the benefit of society when this person is released. Just to say that, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying not everybody in prison can be rehabilitated. Not everybody can. Some people are there and need to be there, like they do. I'm not saying, in fact, a lot of people, most of them are there for that reason. But the changes that we need is to identify people as individuals and not as just one core group of people.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And Aladin, last words?
One size doesn't fit all. We know that it's a truism in every sector. I think in terms of change implemented in the prison system, I think the two clear ones, not just from today, but from any day really, is that to understand that, as Leon said at the outset, it's an opportunity to work with individuals to reconnect for the benefit of everybody. And then secondly, and it's a correlative, that is, of course, to look at that as education. And I think this is a word which is not a bugbear for too many people. Mm-hmm. And I do think that we should be the ones pushing for a proper learning culture. And if I'm a professor, I'd love to put in the highest achieving stuff in prisons, just as we do elsewhere, and require people to stretch to that. That's why we are looking at nudge design, because we realize that politically that's It's quite a handy way to look at it. But whatever way we can find, Trojan horse even, to put in the highest standards and to say that practitioners like us, we find it really challenging to go in those contexts, to say that our best work as educators might be there. That's the most challenging one. And in fact, it's got the widest benefit because it's got this two-edged sword. You are curing people, but also wider society is benefiting from that. So you've got those two layers going on. So I think education is key to all of it.
It is, but sorry, can I just add one thing, Whitney? Is that when society, in my opinion, when society understands and realize that everybody is everybody's problem, then things will develop and get better. Because right now, I think that everyone's like, oh, that's his problem, that's her problem. It's nothing to do with us. But everybody's problem is everybody's problem, and that's the problem that we don't understand.
Yeah, in education, it's said very easily, it takes a village to educate a child. And you can turn that around. It takes a society to injure a child. And it takes a society to redress the pain and harm of that child as well. It's said easier when we talk to a child. But we need to find a way to use that kind of analogy to look at prison and young people and around violence.
And I definitely agree with you there. I think village is the key word. I would just like to say as well, we've missed out a key part of the prison system, which are the prison officers and those who are in uniform working within the prison system.
Yeah.
They do have an immensely difficult job. And I think one of the things that we need to do to improve the prison system is to make sure that we have the right prison officers in post and that they are getting looked after, because prison officers are the ones seeing the most violence and experiencing the most trauma from a practitioner point of view, and they also need to be looked after and cared for and be allowed the space to reflect and understand the people that they're there to serve from a different light. And that would be my one thing, that if I could make change tomorrow, it would be very high on my list. But that is all the time that we have for today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. I think we've had the record number of people joining in this week, so I assume it was a good,
close to 200. That's extraordinary.
Yes. Next week, we will be speaking about joint enterprise and life sentences for young people and the wider effects of both. So please tune in on Monday, the 30th of November at 7 p.m. London time, and we will see you then. Thank you very much to my guests.
You must explain, Monday, what all these icons are around the corners. Leon and I are looking and wondering what they are.
They are people giving you props. They are people that are liking what you're saying. So
Leon and I are doing okay. So are you, Whit.
You're doing good. You were doing very great. So thank you very much for being a part of today's Blab and Violence Interrupted seminar series. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in live on the Blab and who will tune in later on the YouTube.
Privileged to hear you both. I found it a real pleasure to hear what you had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.